How can you own a property without putting down a single dollar from your pocket? What if you don't have to go to a bank, ask them for any kind of money? What if you don't have to go to your friends, family members, and raise capital, set up a syndicate? None of that stuff. You're able to simply go to people and say, look, I want to take your property. You transfer it to me and you keep the mortgage. Don't worry about the payments. I'll make those payments, but just transfer the property to me because I don't want to take a loan under my name. Why don't I want to do the loan under my name? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one is banks put restriction on me. There's only so much I can borrow. At a certain point, bank says, hey, wait a minute, the risk is rising. No, we're not going to let you borrow anymore. So that's one reason. Number two, maybe I have bad credit. So banks maybe don't want to lend me to begin with. Number three, well, I can borrow the money, but how am I going to pay them back? Maybe I don't have enough cash flow to pay for that mortgage. So I have all kind of reasons why I cannot get the money from elsewhere. But what if I can go to a property owner and just say to them that, hey, look, I'm a nice guy. I'm here to help you. I'm going to solve your problem. I'm going to buy your property. I'm going to give you whatever price that you are asking for. But in return, I want you to keep the mortgage. I want you to keep the debt. I want you to hold on to all the liabilities associated with this property, but I want you to transfer the asset to me. Now, some of you guys who are smart will probably ask me this question. Wait a minute, Deepak, why would anybody in the world do it? And then there is a whole bunch of people out there teaching exactly this strategy. They teach you how to go find people who are in desperate situations, who are financially struggling, how you can solve their problem, and at the same time, build wealth. So I'm going to talk about that strategy today. It's called subject to properties or subject to mortgages or subject to lending. In other words, subject to certain conditions. And you can actually make a subject to deal in many different ways. You can do this in business. You can do this with residential properties, commercial properties. You can do it in so many different ways, but they all come with landmines. So today, my goal is to kind of dig deeper into it. If you are into one of those programs or are thinking about joining these programs, I think you're really going to enjoy this video. Now, those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Deepak. I run a tax firm called Tax Code Advisors. So you can go to taxcodeadvisors.com, reach out to me. If you want to meet with me in person, I do a lot of different meetups. I have one coming up in California, another one in Austin, Texas. After that, I'll be in Seattle, Washington, and then Telluride, Colorado. So 4 different places in the next couple of months. So you can come see me at any one of those. Just go to taxcodeadvisors.com and reach out to me from there. So let's talk about this deal. How can you own a property? So let's talk about from a positive point of view, and then we'll talk about it from a negative point of view, because there are different parties involved. We have to think about all kind of things that happens with it. So you guys all remember COVID time. A lot of people were very happy because mortgages were super low at that time. You could buy properties for as low as 2%, 3% interest rate. That's wonderful, right? But these days, the interest rates has gone up a lot, especially since the war. We were hoping that interest rates would go down, but now we're all worried about these oil prices rising and inflation and the escalation in the war. So there's a lot of fear in the market right now. And people are worried about inflation. And because of that, nobody's counting on interest rates going down anytime soon. And that's why you're seeing in housing stocks and mortgage stocks, all of those have gone down a lot. As a matter of fact, many of the industrial construction company stocks has gone down a lot because people are assuming now the construction is going to slow down. Take a look at home builders, similar situation. Anyhow, this is the problem you are trying to solve. Your problem is, well, number one, I want to own a lot of properties. Number two, I don't want to go to bank. And number three, I don't want to pay high interest rate. So how do I solve those 3 problems? I think many of you guys would love to solve those problems, right? So how would you do that? Well, the solution is very simple. You go to somebody who bought a property during the COVID time. Maybe they have interest rate of 2%, 3%. And now they're running into some sort of financial trouble. What does that mean? Well, you might say, well, that's not even possible because these days interest rate is 7% and they bought the property at 2 or 3%. Why would they be in financial? They actually are better off than most other people because they're paying low interest rates. Well, interest rate is just one aspect of your finances. Your spending habits, your investing habits, your gambling habits, your education, your job situation, your family situation, your health situation. Everything impacts your finances. So when we're thinking about investing, when we're thinking about growing our wealth, we have to take a comprehensive review of everything. We cannot just really look at one element. So a lot of people, maybe they bought the property back in those days, but today they could be struggling. For example, maybe somebody who owns the property is now sick. Maybe they're dealing with life-threatening situation and they just simply can't pay the mortgage anymore. And if they can't pay the mortgage anymore, what's going to happen? They're going to lose the property anyways. That is really bad. So wouldn't that be cool if you're able to go to them and say, hey, look, I understand you're struggling in life and I would love to own your property, but the interest rates are very high. So I would like to make a deal with you. I want to pay you extra $10,000, $20,000 in cash and take over your mortgage so that way you don't have to make the mortgage payments. All you have to do is transfer the property to me. And as long as you do that, I will continue to pay the mortgage. And at some point, I will refinance it under my name. And don't worry, we're going to do a proper contract to make sure you're all covered. So this person who is really sick right now probably go like, oh my God, this is awesome. Because if this person wouldn't have showed up, I would have lost the property, probably have gone to bankruptcy, and my family would have struggled. So you're actually helping that person. Similarly, maybe somebody lost a job. Maybe they bought a property in Seattle or some other expensive place, and it's a nice property, maybe million and a half dollar property. And at that time, they had a good job that was paying them $250,000, $300,000 a year, and now they lost the job. And you guys know how the housing market is right now. They're not able to sell. So you go to them and say, let's make a deal at least for next 5 years. Why don't we make a deal for the next 5 years? I'm responsible for the payment. And within the 5 years, if your situation improves, you can take the property back. But for the next 5 years, I will own the property. Or if your situation doesn't improve, then I own the property and I'll refinance it after 5 years. Something like that, right? Subject to certain conditions. So you can come up with a contract like that. Maybe somebody inherited the property. Maybe their father, mother, their uncle, grandfather, they're the one who had good cash flow. They're the one who were able to afford the property, but now they are no longer there. And you have the property, but you just don't have a cash flow to be able to make those payments. So once again, you kind of show up as a lifesaver to help those people. And I can go on to many other examples, but the reality is there are situations like these. Not many, but there are some. Like you can call them our distressed sales. So if you call everyone, let's say you go into a neighborhood in Fremont, California, and you start calling every single homeowner, I'm sure you're going to find a couple people who are struggling in life and they'll be happy to take your help. But it's not as easy as you think. It requires a lot of work, a lot of calling, a lot of digging, a lot of connecting in community. It's very, very hard to do. But is it possible? Absolutely. Now, there are some problems with it. So let's say if I'm the guy selling you that property, so I have to go like, okay, so let me understand. So you're saying that I transfer the property to you, so you get the property, and I would have to own the debt. How does that work? Wouldn't bank have trouble with it? Wouldn't bank says, well, I gave you this debt against the property, and now you're transferring this property to somebody else. I want my money back. Don't you think that's reasonable? And I would say to you that, well, that is reasonable, but only if bank finds out. So most of these deals, when we talk about, they kind of revolve around if somebody else finds out. Because you can be clever, you can structure things any way you want, but it's the intent that matters, right? So if things go to court, the judge is going to ask you or trying to figure out what your intention was. And they're going to make a decision based on that, not the way you structure the transaction. Structuring the transaction can buy you some time. It can help you get the best tax treatment and all that. But at the end of the day, the judges are looking for an intent. So let's say if you want to do the deal, how would you do it? Well, most likely what you're going to do is you're going to set up a land trust. First of all, not all states allow you to do that, but let's assume you're in a state that does allow you to have a land trust. Now you transfer the property to that land trust, and from that land trust, you become the beneficiary of that trust. So the property is transferred into the land trust. You becomes the beneficiary of that land trust, and you set up a separate LLC, and that LLC becomes a trustee of that land trust. What does the bank sees? Bank only sees that you transfer the property into a trust. And banks typically ignore that. Why do they ignore that? Because they look at it and they go, okay, the most likely this person is doing it from estate planning purpose. That is how they're going to try to sell you this strategy. But once again, does it work? Yeah, it can work. But if somebody were to figure it out, if banks were to figure it out, or there's a dispute between a seller and the buyer, and they go out there and tell to the bank, then all of those problems can happen. So keep that in mind. Second thing, me as a seller, if I'm in a really bad condition, maybe I don't want to do any due diligence. Maybe I'm in such a bad spot that I'll just simply take your words. But if that person has a good advisor, if they have an attorney, they have a tax advisor, somebody he can go talk to who can guide them through how these transactions work, most likely they're going to say to them, well, this person, you're transferring the property to you. Have you checked their credit? Have you checked what their net worth looks like? Have you checked if they have ever missed a payment? What their credit history looks like? How much money they have in their bank account? What if they simply disappear? What if they don't make any payment going forward? Just like they're trying to sell you this program called Subject to, similarly, there could be what if scenarios that a seller can ask. Most likely they won't because they're desperate. They don't, they are just kind of stuck in a situation. But in reality, they should be asking all of those questions. And if they do ask all those questions, then advisor will say this is not the right way to structure the transaction. The right way to structure this transaction is to get the bank involved and do a loan reassignment. And then they go to a bank and say, look, this person wants to take over the loan. Let's do the due diligence and let the bank see if this person qualifies to take over the loan. That's the right way to do it. Now, for that, there are two requirements. Number one, the original loan has to have an option for reassignment. Most loans don't. Number two, the new person has to have an ability to be able to take on that mortgage. And in situations like that, most likely that is not possible. So there are some landmines around that. Second problem that you will probably deal with is insurance. Well, if you own the property and somebody else owns the debt, how is the insurance going to work out? Because the the mortgage company wants to see the insurance. So most likely now you're going to go to the seller and say, well, okay, I solved this problem for you, but now I need a favor from you. I want to show you that you are the primary insurer for this property, and I'm going to become a secondary insured. And then just in case there's anything wrong happens, or there's a fire or something like that, then I want insurance to pay to this particular LLC. So they'll try to work out some sort of setup for insurance company as well. But again, you can see once you start this process, then every single step requires you to do additional steps. That means the transaction starts to become more and more complicated. Then comes HOA. Now you own the property, somebody else has a debt. How does the HOA works? So that creates another kind of issue as well. Number three, well, where is the lien? What happens with the lien on that property? The lien doesn't disappear. Lien is still there. But technically speaking, that creates a problem because the owner of the property has actually changed. So that creates its own set of legal ramifications as well. Again, I'm saying in a perfect world where nobody finds out anything and things work out great, yeah, can this strategy work? Of course it can. But if something goes wrong along the way, somebody finds something out, somebody wants to dispute something, all the parties can get into trouble. So to me, this seems like a very expensive way to build wealth because one wrong step can come back and take the entire empire down. Now, let's just say you're sold on this strategy, you're sold on this idea, and you say, look, we're willing to take a risk because the upside potential is huge. I like the idea of having a lot of cash flow. I like the idea of having low mortgage payments. So I can deal with some of these issues that I talked about. So what's the downside? So when you buy a property, unless you are a professional developer or builder, then you probably don't really understand all the problems that you can possibly run into. And I'll share some examples with you. I was working with a gentleman and he bought a property, a land, and he started building a house on it. And he spent a couple $100,000 to build the foundation. After he built the foundation and everything, he got the permits, he went to the all the things that were required to build everything. Then he realized that as he was digging to build that foundation, there was water coming out of that property. And there was no way to stop that. So it costed him a lot of money to build a system to deal with that water problem. This is something he wouldn't have figured out. So if you're buying a property, you don't know what you don't know. It can have foundation problems. There could be a roof problem, plumbing failures, electrical problems, HVAC issues, mold issue, water damage. There could be unpermitted additions. Somebody might have made some changes to the original plan. There could be illegal conversions. There could be some liens on the property that you might not have really studied or at least not prepared to deal with. And let's just say later on you want to sell the property or you want to properly refinance and somebody goes through a proper due diligence, then you're going to have to spend all that money to bring the property back up to the code, and that can cost you a lot of money. There could be a lot of environmental issues these days. A lot of time laws change. Some property was maybe built 30, 40 years ago, and now that you're really going through a proper channel, then all of those issues show up. But because you bought the property through this kind of sideway, these issues were ignored. There could be contaminated soil. There could be undergoing oil tanks that you might not have accounted for. There could be lead issue, paint issues. There could be liens issues, judgment liens, easement disputes, boundary problems, mechanic liens. So many other problems could be on the property that you're not really aware of, and that can all really cost you as well. So there are upside potential and there are downside risk. So I would say don't get super excited about these kind of strategies. Easiest strategy is to save money. Find a good property in a good area. It doesn't have to be a big property. If you don't have a lot of money, you can start with a small property, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. Learn how to analyze the deal. Learn how to figure out if it is cash flow positive for you or not. Learn about different markets. United States is huge. A lot of people get familiar with their local area only, but these days you have access to Zillow. You can take a look at what the rental properties are in different part of the country. You got Google, you got AI these days. You have a lot of tools to find areas where there are some good property that can be cash flow positive, and start building your credit, start building a business credit, start building a relationship with bankers, investors, start building relationship with people who maybe are in a similar situation like you, and they want to buy a property, so you can kind of work together with them. Slow and steady process. This way you are buying a good property, you're buying it at a fair price, you're doing your due diligence. So chances of you making a mistake is very, very slim. And at the end of the day, when you want to turn around and sell that property, you'll be able to do it in a nice and clean way as well. So that would be my suggestion. These sideway tricks oftentimes don't work out, although they sound very, very exciting on paper. So I think this subject needs to be brought to life. People should really learn about this product. And if you think about it, if there was a big distress market for these real estate, there would be a website today, which people will be able to go there and sell their property in a matter of seconds. The truth is, this market is not that big. That's why you don't know about it. I mean, do you really think that Zillow don't understand this, or Realtor.com doesn't understand it, or any other favorite real estate website that you might know of? I mean, these people are smart. These people have PhDs. These people have engineers. These people have market researchers. They understand the appetite of the market. The reality is the market is so small, right? And in order to close that deal, you have to go through so many illegal hoops that it just doesn't make sense to make it mainstream. And that is why these kind of strategies exist. So I hope that helps. If you want to talk more about that, reach out to me via taxcodeadvisors.com, and I'll be happy to do a proper discussion and explain to you what are some of these landmines. I kind of touch on some of the basics around there, but I strongly encourage you to come see me in person. So that way you get to know me and learn finance the right way. Thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you next time.